This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Well, good morning, Kelly. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? Glad to have you back.
I know, it's good to be back.
We had Kayla on the last one. I think she did a good job.
She did.
But she pushed off this one. She could have done this one last week, and she didn't.
Oh, okay.
She pushed it off. She wanted you to do it.
I thought I was going to lose my job.
Nah. You're good.
So, what do we have today? What are we talking about?
So we're talking about tying up the summer, right? Closing out the summer.
Yeah.
And getting school started. So what we're really talking about is finalizing all of our preparations. We should have all of our people trained. We should have plans, schedules, all of that done. Now we have to walk up to the school door, unlock it, open it up, and greet all of those smiley faces.
All those kids that are so excited to come back to school.
Yes. Those ones. And all of their states of enjoyment.
There you go. So what are some of the things that a school can look at the very start to ensure safety?
Yeah, so when we're talking about opening up our schools and stuff, we really have to start looking at making sure everything is done. Like we just said, have our checklist, make sure everything we did over the summer was well received, and now it's time to put it into motion, right? So as a safety coordinator, as a director of safety, we should be verifying and validating everything that we did. Make sure that all of the systems at all of the schools are working properly, making sure when we open those doors, our teachers are prepared. They're at the strategic locations where they're assigned to receive the kids. And when I say receive the kids, I mean really receive the kids. One of the most proactive things we can do about a kid's mental health, a student's mental health, is welcome them every day with a smile on our face and acknowledge their existence. And that starts at day one, from kindergarten all the way up through their senior year in high school. And so when you have your teachers out there in the morning welcoming, somebody needs to acknowledge each and every one of those kids. Good morning, welcome, have a great day. Today's our day to succeed, or however you want to be positive about that. But having a positive welcome is one of the biggest things we can do. And that starts day one. And we want to make sure that not only are we greeting our students that way, but our building administration are greeting our staff that way. Making sure that they're acknowledged, making sure that they're in a good place when we start welcoming our students. You know, over the past 6 months or so, we've seen a lot of stories about the stress and the emotional impacts that the current situation around the country is having on our teachers. And so we need to check up on them regularly as well and support them as well. So what we're really doing is looking at all of our systems, our bus systems, our security systems, cybersecurity. We're talking running out to make sure that our crossing guards are where they're supposed to be and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now, most of us don't have the personnel to run around and check every system at every school at the same time. But we can make sure that every school has the understanding that they need to do that. And the sooner they can get all of those systems checks, the better off they're going to be.
Is there any particular systems that are like at a higher priority than others, or is it just kind of all part of the same thing in that way?
Well, at some point, we're going to have to check every system.
Right.
So prioritize the ones that are most important to you. And if you take your three objectives that we've talked about of what the parents want, it's getting their kids from home to school safely. Once they get there, keeping them safe and having a supportive environment. And at the end of the day, get them back, right? Home safely. And so if you take those and you prioritize what it takes to get from those systems that are engaged from when they leave the house to when they get to school, before they get there, if you make sure that your crossing guards are there, your buses are ready to go. In the past couple of weeks, there's been a lot of schools that have been opening with lots and lots of issues with their buses. So don't neglect those buses. Kids rely on those buses, families rely on those buses, and they rely on them to do them correctly. And when I say do that correctly, that means right kids on the right bus, get them to school, and at the end of the day, put them on the right bus. Make sure that you have the right kids and that the right kids are getting off at the right stops. That may sound, kind of like a simplistic approach, but most of the issues that we've been having with buses the beginning of this year have been centered around exactly that. And we simply can't have that, but it's understandable. We have new bus drivers, new kids, new families that are trying to figure it all out. But this is the time that we have to really take our time and make sure that all of the right kids are on the right bus. When we start looking at our buses and, then that naturally feeds into drop off and pick up, right? So what systems do you have to get them from the buses into the class? And then at the end of the day, what systems do you have to get them from their class into the buses, to the correct buses? So work at that. It's not just that you can count on a kindergarten, a first grader, a third grader. You need to go to bus 22. You know what I mean? We have to make sure that those kids are actually getting on the right bus at the right time, because oftentimes bus 22 has like 3 routes, right? At different times of the day. So we need to make sure that the right kids are on the right bus. And are they all going in through the same door? We have all these physical security measures in place. Are our cameras working? Are our access control? Are the perimeters, our gates, are they open because kids are coming to school? And are they closed as soon as the bell rings for all of our kids that should be in school already? And how do we work through those processes, right?
Sounds like a lot of work at the first start of the school year, huh?
Right, it is. But this is when we set the tone, right?
That's right.
This is when we set and say, look, your safety matters to us. So we're going to sit here and we're going to check this and we're going to see what's working correctly, what isn't. And we're going to correct those things that aren't. We're going to improve those things where we can improve them. And this is the one that's right now is when we set the tone for the entire school year. And people understand that. If we start with a sort of a lackadaisical approach to this, then you're going to get that kind of response later. And it's going to be much more difficult to instill what you want to do later because you've already set the tone, and the tone is not to the high standard that we should be having.
And that definitely plays a part in the mental health that you kind of talk about in your blog, right? Because if you feel safe, I think your mental health is going to be probably more positive than if you were to walk in there and not feel safe, right?
Right. But let me sort of expand on that just a little bit. It's not only about feeling safe, because as we've talked about this before, different people feel safe under different circumstances, right?
Yeah.
But what we're trying to really instill is not only that they feel safe, but they understand and they feel confident that you will keep them safe, right? So if something happens, they have the confidence that you are going to react appropriately and that you are there to protect them. And that really is the crux of the emotional aspect of school safety. is that they have the confidence, their parents, the community thinks that you have the ability and the skills to keep their kids safe. So that's really what we're trying to work towards, is that people are confident. And you do that by having all of these systems in place, that they're validated, that they're working, and that you have confidence that all of this is going to work when it's needed. And that's really the crux of this, right? And these are all of those things that we have to do before something happens to be prepared to respond to that incident whenever it happens, right?
Yep.
And again, that's setting the tone. If we have this safety culture that we've been talking about instilled in everything that we're doing, then people have the confidence. When somebody asks a question, doesn't matter who they ask the question to, they're going to get a good response there. Not a, well, we have a checklist, right? No, this is the way we're going to do this. If that happens, this is what we're going to do. They understand it, and they can confidently respond to any question by any parent. They have to be, students of this safety program. And when you become a student of safety and keeping your kids safe, then you become more confident. And we've talked about that many, many times.
Yeah, you can't pull out that checklist if you're in a really intense situation. I mean, you could, but it would not be very beneficial in that situation.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. People understand that you can't do, if you say, oh, we have a safety plan for that. Okay, what is your safety plan? Well, we have this binder. Well, what is that? What's in there? You should know that.
Yep.
And that's the whole idea about this, is that binder is your textbook for school safety. And you should know what's in that binder. And if you have technology like Crisis Go, then you should know what's in there and what's important and how to respond. Because like you said, we're not going to be able to sit back and look at that. But people understand when they ask you a question, whether or not you have the confidence to do it correctly and the competence to do it correctly. And that's when they feel, or they develop their comfort level, is based upon when somebody starts talking to you about school safety, whether or not you can answer that correctly. And this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody in the education and instructional industry, is, when your students are just trying to fudge it, right? They're kind of being lazy about it. They're not really putting in the effort. And you start talking to them about that material and they don't know it. They're going to try to make you think they know it, but right off, they don't know what they're talking about. So that's what we can't afford. We need to have all of our staff understand all of this material. And it's a lot, totally get it, but that's what we should start working towards.
So we've been kind of talking about what a school would need to do, in this first week that they're there, right? All these things they need to look over and make sure that they're working. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about these events that would happen. And let's say, you give the example of a football game. So I think this would be a really good conversation because I don't hear it a whole lot, and something that I think definitely should be talked about more, because there's a lot of room for error, I guess is what I would say. That there's lots of different opportunities for things to go wrong if you're not planning for it.
That's correct. So I'm going to start off by saying this. We have talked about vulnerabilities and where we are most vulnerable. And those are those choke points, right? Yep. Where there's lots of people being funneled into an area, and where we have to be most concerned about the safety of our students, our parents, whoever's coming into our building, or in this case, a sporting event, right? I chose to do Friday night football because that's coming. And in fact, we've already had 2 incidences at a football game, one where there were actually shots fired, and one where there was threats made that there were going to be shots fired, so they ended up canceling the entire football event for this past weekend. And so what's interesting is I looked at some data that was put out by one of our partners, Zero Eyes, in gun detection. And while we tend to talk about school shootings in the context of an active shooter, right?
Yep.
But there's many more shootings that aren't really that typical active shooter where you have somebody who is just angry with the entire world and they just want to get a high count. There are far more shootings where there are targeted violence that is meant for a specific person or a specific group of people, gang related, or there's some vendetta that is out there and they target specific people, which I think one of the one that was actually a shooting, I think it was in Oklahoma, was at least preliminarily thought to be a specific target. There was an argument and then shots fired as a result of that argument. So when we're talking about these vulnerabilities, we have to really look at where are we weakest at, right? And what are our biggest vulnerabilities? And it's any event where you're going to have a large gathering. They have to go through a funnel. Let's call it that because that's kind of what it looks like. They all have to go through the same one or two entrances. And most of all, the vast majority of the people in attendance are not your kids. They're unknowns. So we're talking families, friends, some of these smaller towns, rural areas, even some suburban areas where there's generations of people who are coming to this sporting event. I remember I started my law enforcement career at a sheriff's department. And for a little bit of time, about 6 years, I went to a local police department. Then I came back to the sheriff's department. That local police department was in a smaller town, about 16,000 people, one high school, one middle school, and like 8 elementary schools. But everyone that went to that high school, they came back for generations. They were part of that culture, that football culture. And even if they didn't have kids coming, all of the past football stars would come when they were 20 years old, when they were 30 years old, 40, 50. They were all wearing their Letterman's jackets. That was the thing.
Oh, yeah.
And so these are all people that aren't necessarily known to the school. These are people who have been gone from a few years to decades, but they're still coming back to the school and they're still participating in this large event. And when I say large event, we're talking thousands, right? It's not just the parents of the football players. We're talking the entire school. We're talking the younger brothers and sisters of the players. We're talking about that whole football culture. That's the thing in that community that they go to every Friday night. People travel. It is just amazing to me. In certain regards, it's fascinating. It's huge. It's a great thing to have that kind of support for your schools. But that also brings in a lot of other issues, right?
Oh, yeah. A lot of variables.
Right. And because there are rivalries.
Oh, yeah.
Right. There's graffiti that's going on. There's challenges. There's things that are being said all week long. This is the big game. This is, our crosstown rivals. This is going to be crazy. And there are so many things that happen at these large events that are completely out of your control. Do you have law enforcement there? If so, are there enough? You have crowd control. You have alcohol and substance abuse occurring before they ever get there. You have people who try to rush the gates. There's so many different aspects of this that you really have to sit down with everybody involved, especially for that first game, and you have to set the tone. We're going to be there. We're going to have kids here. We're going to have our instructors, we're going to have our athletic directors, we're going to have our coaches. Everyone's going to be on the same sheet of music. And that has to take place because the ability for something to go south very quickly is huge. I remember I was a young police officer, and our high school had won the first round of the playoffs. And it went from this totally, it's supposed to be a good thing, to nearly a riot. People were getting hurt. People were getting trampled. They were trying to take down the goalposts. All of those things. And it was supposed to be a good thing. And the other team got involved with it, and it was just a mess. And it went very, very quickly. And so, speaking from experience, we had 2 police officers at that game and about 10 security. And I'm talking mid 80s, right?
What do you mean mid 80s?
Mid 1980s.
Oh, okay.
Right. So this is a long time ago.
Yeah.
And we weren't dealing with the same issues that we're dealing with today. Much more critical today. And it's necessary for us to understand the culture. And I think I got sidetracked just a little bit and ran down a rabbit hole a little bit.
That's common for you, but it's okay.
Yeah, it is. But the number of incidences, I looked at a study done by one of our partners at Zero Eyes, and the number of incidences and where they occurred overwhelmingly in the parking lot.
Wow.
Right. And they were crazy numbers.
So what do you think that is specifically? Do you think that's like a before the event or after the event? Like after whoever loses, they are bitter, some they come out and they start fighting each other out in the parking lot?
So it's all kinds of different things going on, right?
Okay.
First of all, where's the security at?
Yeah.
Inside, right? So the security is not necessarily in the parking lot. It's not in the neighborhoods right across the street from the football stadium, but it's still school related, even though it's not on school property. It's school related, right? So the school has to be involved with the policing of that. Now, they may not run out there, but they need to make sure that they have police out there or that their security are out there. And there are just so many things that can go wrong so quickly. And I saw a video this morning of the game in Oklahoma, and all of a sudden, wasn't that I actually heard the shots being fired, but you can see how vulnerable the team was on the football field and how quickly they dispersed. You knew something was bad and you saw the confusion. And I could tell you, looking at the video, you could point to where it occurred. And the reason I say that is because then who's responding to that? And who's headed in that direction? Do you have enough law enforcement there? Is your SRO controlling that? Who's dealing with that? And how are you going to deal with that? And it was probably a targeted, like I said, it was after an argument or during an argument that the weapon was pulled.
Sure.
So it probably wasn't your typical active shooter, right? It was an argument gone south. But it affects everybody in that entire stadium. And what are you going to do when that happens? Now, that being said, what happens if somebody throws a bunch of firecrackers? How are you going to respond to that? Right. And so, especially when people are hearing about this on the news, and then all of a sudden somebody throws, a bunch of firecrackers in a trash can,
which can,
sound like lots of fire. Yeah. Especially if there's a whole string of them together. Right.
Yep.
So those are things that we have to consider, and security getting into those games has to be tightened up. I don't know how a firearm got into those stands. I believe it was in the stands. I don't know how it got in there, but we're going to have to figure out how to prevent that. And that includes understanding that oftentimes our stadiums are open to the public before an event. So people can use the track to jog around and exercise and run up and down stairs on the stadium, those types of things. If you allow your community to do that, which I don't have any problems with, you have to do a security sweep before then so that people can't stash weapons in there beforehand.
Yeah, that would definitely be pretty, premeditated. So
right, but there's if you have gang activity, there's lots of things that become premeditated very quickly.
Oh yeah.
Right. So retaliation, these beefs that you have going on in schools, personal rivalries within the schools, and understanding that where's the most likely place you're going to find your rival might be at a football game. Now, we're talking about football games, but this goes to any event.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Basketball game, soccer game, swim meet. My kids were in water polo. All of these different events. I remember we paid a ticket, walked in. That can't be the case anymore. We have to search people. We have to send them through metal detectors. We have to do our due diligence to keep the people inside safe. And if you start doing that kind of stuff, then people are going to think twice about bringing something into the stadium or the place of the event, whatever that event is.
Yeah, I mean, you almost basically need to run like a TSA checkpoint through these things. I mean, maybe not as intimidating, but
well, no, but you need to make sure that they're secure, right?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that it's there would deter someone from bringing a weapon in or whatever.
Yeah, if they think they're going to be found, then they're not going to do it.
Yeah,
and that's what you got to do. Do whatever it takes for them to believe that you're going to find what they're bringing in, whether it's a knife, a gun, whatever, right? But let me ask you a question.
Oh boy, let's hear it.
We've been doing these for, close to 10 months now, right?
Yeah.
8 months now. What do you think their evacuation plan was in Oklahoma when that shot rang out?
Oh, geez. Probably run, run to a safe spot.
And then what?
Maybe like hide somewhere or
get out of there. And how do you reconnect with your kids?
Yeah.
So I remember going to football games when I was a kid. I went to high school football games when I was 10, 11, 12 years old because I'm the youngest of 6. So I had older siblings. So they wanted to go to school football games, and I had to, if they wanted to go, they had to take me with them. Right.
Yeah.
And so it was cool because they didn't care what I did. And we went into the end zone, the younger kids. We found somebody with a football and we played our own little football game in the end zone. And now something like this happens. How do you get everyone reunited? How do you know who's even there? I'm not going to answer those questions for you because everyone is different, but that's what you got to start thinking about. And if you look at that, and I encourage people to go look at that video, it's got to be online now. Go look at it and ask this question. What is that question, Ethan?
I mean, there's lots of questions I could ask.
But what's the question I'm going to ask is, what if that happened here?
Oh, yeah.
What would I do? How would I handle this? Right. And it's one of those things you got to look at it from using the information you have available and look and say, what if that happened here? How would I get my kids understanding my culture, understanding how these things routinely play out, just a regular routine football game, no incident. What happens at a regular football game? You got to understand that first. And if you understand what's happening at a football game with no incidents, everything's great. You win by 20 points or whatever, everything's great. And then something happens. What are you going to do? What's happening? What are your challenges? What are your obstacles? How do you navigate those? And how do you bring that, all to a successful end? And if you look at this video, and there's a unique phenomena that I learned by watching people, and that's when they run. We have run, hide, fight.
Mm-hmm.
They will run as far as they think they need to in order to feel safe. That's different for different people.
I was going to say, for some people, they could be running for quite
Forever.
a ways.
They're still running, right? But others, it's a very short distance.
Yeah.
Right? And you see in this video, it was a 30-second video, if that. Everyone started to run in the opposite direction, but the opposite direction is different based upon where you started from, right?
Yeah.
So that radiates out almost 360 degrees from that area, right? From that initial point. That's why I said you could probably tell exactly where that occurred. But they start running, and at some point, several of them just fall down and quote, hide, but they're hiding in the middle of the football field.
No way.
Oh, yeah. And you're sitting there going, wait a second. Why are you doing that? And that's a natural reaction for people, right? And they may not feel safe there, but they're trying to get as small as they can. And they're trying to get down low, right? And so how do we get those people out of there? How do we get those people moving? Those are all things that we have to ask ourselves, right? So there's other aspects of this that, how do you deal with a kid that gets lost?
Yeah, I think that's probably an important thing to talk about for sure.
There's so many things that could happen. And, we always take it to the extreme, but there are so many things. Lost kids, lost parents, right? And medical emergencies. Not only in the playing field, somebody gets hurt or something happens to them, but how about the stands?
Yeah, you ever walked up those stands?
Walked up those stands? Well, not only that, you have grandparents, old people.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Sure.
People my age that are walking these stairs and have medical issues. It's cold, it's hot, depending on what part of the season. There are so many things, and you really have to look down your checklist of all of these things that could happen, and you have to start figuring out, do you have medical people to respond to the stand? For many, many years, there have been requirements to have an ambulance on standby for the football players. Totally understand that. What about the people in the stands?
I was going to say, does that same ambulance are they also responsible for anyone in the stands?
Well, let's walk through that a little bit, right? If they are, and something happens, they're no longer available for their primary purpose for being there as the football players, right?
Right.
So if you have a significant medical emergency in your stands and you have to pull the ambulance crew, the medical crew, from what their primary purpose is to address the medical issue in the stands, you have to stop the football game, right? And you have to have somebody else come in and either take over the medical, which isn't going to happen, or take over the primary responsibility so you can continue with your football game. So maybe you want to have more than one ambulance, one that can address those in the field or in the stands that may or may not come up. We hope they don't, but they do often, and have the one primary focus. So you don't have to disrupt the entire game because somebody had slipped and fell and broke their ankle or something, right?
Yep. I mean, that would be kind of a bummer.
Right? Everyone's going to have different issues. And, really what you're trying to do is plan for all of those potentials and mitigate them beforehand, have a response plan in place. Everyone who's working security has the ability to communicate.
That was kind of one of the things I was thinking about before is like, if it's like a really big game or you're in a, I'm assuming I live in kind of a smaller area, but I'm assuming like these bigger cities and stuff have pretty big, like stadium, like kind of events, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like the audio, like if it gets really loud, like you can't hear anything. Like you need a way that you can effectively communicate with your team. I'm talking about like the security team.
Right. So most of them wear headphones, earphones.
Yeah. I mean, I hope so.
And that's helpful, but you need to make sure everyone's on the same sheet of music, right?
Yeah.
And where are your security staff, and who's going to respond to what, right? Law enforcement, you see them all of the time walking the track, looking up and, just kind of keeping an eye on things. What happens if something happens in the stadium or in the stands, right? And do they have enough security people there to handle that? Or is that law enforcement's responsibility? Those are things that you have to discuss. But the communications is a big part of that. And having everyone on the same radio frequency is a huge thing, right? Because again, the sooner you can squash a problem or respond to a problem or handle a problem, the less likely it's going to grow.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes back in the day when I was working football games, law enforcement had their radios and essentially relied upon the school staff to come and notify them. Talk about a slow way to get something done, right? So, obviously there are technologies available now that we can start overlapping radio systems. We can have everyone have the same radios, make sure law enforcement gets school radios. It's not going to be the other way around. Law enforcement is not going to give up their radios to the school. So make sure that the law enforcement people have school radios and they can respond. If you have a system like Crisis Go, make sure they're on the paging group, on the communications group, and they understand what's going on. Maybe you set up a group that is just for the football event staff. And, that goes with our partners with the Seata SD7s. Those things are great. You can set them up. You can have them a whole group of radios that are just meant for large scale events, right? So work through that and see how do you communicate? Are you going to rely on your PA system? I don't know. I don't think that's the right way to go, but maybe it is. But if you rely on that, be prepared for mass panic and talk about a contagion is when something comes over the PA system saying, we have a problem in section 10. I need your help in section 10. What do you think everyone is going to do?
Everyone's going to bail out of section 10.
No, they're going to go to section 10.
I was talking about if the stands, like the attendees, if they know there's a problem in the area that they're in, they're probably going to disperse out of there, wouldn't they?
Well, maybe, but if there's a fight between two parents, in section 10, what do you think they're going to do? Everyone's going to want to go see Mr. Jones beat up Mr. Smith.
It turns into fight night.
Right? But that's what they're going to do. Right?
Yeah.
Unless it's apparent that there's, something very serious going on. They're going to want to see their spectator. We're spectators. We're at a football game that is based upon the whole concept of the game is based upon combat.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. And, they're warriors out there, or football players. They're warriors. Now I want to see their parents. What are they like? Right.
Everyone's gonna be taking out their cell phones, recording it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And waiting for people to come up, the law enforcement, the security people, those people that are responsible for squashing that. But yeah, it's just one of those things. We have to be very, very deliberate in how we plan and respond to these types of incidences that we could have there. And they can range from a lost child, lost parent, to a mass shooting. And we have to understand how we're going to respond to that.
All right. So we discussed some of the things you talked about in your blog here, kind of the ones we thought were more important, but we definitely went into this a little bit more in detail in the blog. So definitely be sure to check that out. Things you may need to look out for specifically when you're looking at enhancing the safety of your sporting events, no matter what they are. Anything else you want to conclude on, Kelly?
Yeah, I think this is, we'll tie this all together, right? The whole first part of school, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of things going on that we have to be aware of. Just make sure that everything was ready. We planned for this since the end of last school year. We've been planning it all summer long, walking through this. So just really make sure that you understand the nuances, how all of the systems work, and make sure that everyone that you're bringing into the fold on these, especially these large scale events, bringing into your school, opening them all up, all of these things are going to be new. And regardless of how many times you have run a football game over the past 20 years that you've been the principal or the safety coordinator or whatever, this is new to everyone every year. New circumstances, new security measures, new safety measures, new schools, new students are coming in. So there's this new aspect to every year, and we have to get it right because these are huge events for us, and we want to keep them safe. We want people to feel comfortable coming, and we get back to that whole feeling that everyone wants to know that you're going to protect us while we're here. Even if they're not asking, they want to know that this is a safe place to go. If it's not a safe place, just look at your attendance dwindle. If it becomes too much of an issue, your attendance will go down.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.